I never thought betrayal could come from someone whose first cries I had soothed, whose scraped knees I had kissed, and whose dreams I had fueled with every hour of unpaid overtime and every skipped meal. But life has a cruel sense of irony, because it wasn't a stranger who broke my heart. It was my own son. It all started with a dinner that was supposed to be a celebration. "Mom," he said, placing his fork down slowly, "I think it's time I step back from our relationship for a while." My smile froze. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" His eyes shifted away from mine, landing on his expensive watch, a gift from his new in-laws. "Rebecca feels like our connection, your background, it's not really compatible with where I am now. It's just not good optics." Not good optics, like I was some stain on his curated upper-crust lifestyle, like the woman who scrubbed toilets at night and stacked shelves at dawn to put him through law school was now an embarrassment. My throat tightened. "You mean to say you're cutting me off?" He wouldn't even meet my eyes. "It's not personal." But it was. It was the most personal kind of betrayal there is. A rejection of my sacrifices, my love, my existence. And all for what? For a woman whose family owned summer homes in 3 countries? For country club dinners and socialite luncheons? I walked home that night in the cold, even though he had a driver waiting. I refused to sit in a car bought with the money of people who thought I was trash. My fingers trembled as I clutched my coat tighter. I remembered the nights I'd come home with bleeding feet after 12-hour shifts, only to stay up and help him finish his science projects. I remembered lying to the landlord just to buy him a new suit for his college interview. I remembered everything. And clearly, he remembered nothing. He didn't even call the next day, or the next week, or the month after. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I had leaned on him too much after his father died. Maybe I wasn't good enough at pretending we were normal when his friends came over. Maybe I should have just worked harder to fit into the life he now wanted. But as the days passed, the fog of heartbreak cleared, and what I saw in its place wasn't sadness. It was rage. White-hot, burning rage. Not just because he had abandoned me, but because I had given everything, and he had discarded me like a used napkin at a fancy dinner party. I had scrubbed other people's messes to make sure he never had to scrub his own. I had starved so he could eat. And now? Now I was alone in a 2-bedroom apartment that still had his childhood trophies on the shelves, but no son to speak of. I began to notice things I had ignored in my blind devotion. How he never introduced me to Rebecca's family. Always. Saying it was complicated. How he suddenly stopped asking about my bills or health. How he shifted the topic every time I brought up the money he promised to pay back from his bar exam fund. And as I pieced it all together, I realized this wasn't just about abandonment. It was about erasure. He wanted to erase where he came from. Erase me. But what he didn't know is that I may have bent over backward for him, but I never broke. And now that I had nothing left to lose, I was going to make sure he remembered exactly who helped him get to that gilded pedestal he was so desperate to protect. And I was going to make sure he paid for forgetting it. I didn't cry the day he ghosted me. No birthday call, no message, nothing. It had been 3 months since that awful dinner, 3 months of silence. I would sit by the window with a cup of coffee, half hoping his car would pull up, that he'd come to his senses, knock on my door, apologize, and say he didn't mean it. But he didn't. And each silent day made something clearer. This wasn't a phase. It wasn't temporary. He had chosen this. The final confirmation came from a neighbor who worked at one of those upscale catering companies. She saw him at a charity gala, arm in arm with Rebecca, laughing with her father, Clive Reynolds, a real estate mogul known for flipping entire neighborhoods like poker chips. The kind of man who looks down on anyone without an Ivy League degree and $1 million trust fund. They looked like royalty, she said, like they didn't have a care in the world. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at a stack of unpaid utility bills and a notice for a rent increase. My back ached from standing all day at the diner, and my legs still hadn't recovered from the cleaning shift I pulled over the weekend. I was exhausted. Every joint in my body screamed for rest, but my mind refused to shut down. Because while I struggled to keep the lights on, my son was sipping champagne with billionaires. And then I remembered something. 3 years ago, before he met Rebecca, he had asked me to co-sign a loan for his bar exam and living expenses. I didn't even hesitate. Of course I signed. He was my boy. He said he'd pay me back as soon as he got his first case. Except he never did. He landed a corporate law job thanks to his now father-in-law's connections, and not once did he mention repaying me. I hadn't wanted to push. I was just proud of him. But pride didn't pay the rent. I found the old loan paperwork, still tucked into my drawer. My name was there, clear as day. I'd co-signed for $38,000, money I'd scraped together from savings, odd jobs, and a small inheritance from my mother. Money I could have used to get out of that tiny apartment, money I no longer had. And then there was the insurance policy. I'd listed him as the sole beneficiary years ago, back when I thought I was building a future for both of us. I had taken out a modest policy through my union job at the hospital cafeteria. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. So while I spent my nights aching and my days counting coins, he lived in a luxury penthouse with a view of the skyline, with the same woman who thought I wasn't compatible with their social image. I started noticing the stories too. One of my coworkers had read an article in the city paper about up-and-coming young power couples. There he was, my son, in a full-page spread with Rebecca, smiling in designer suits and pearls. The article praised his humble beginnings and how he overcame adversity to rise to the top. Humble beginnings? Adversity? Funny how they skipped the part where I pawned my wedding ring to pay his tuition, or how he lived rent-free in my home until he was 28. He had built a new life on a foundation I laid brick by brick, and then turned around and spat on it. But here's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't just hurt. It fuels you. It hardens you. And when the pain simmers long enough, it turns into something else. Purpose. So I started keeping track. Little notes, documents, things he thought I'd never pay attention to. Because if he wanted to act like I didn't exist, then he needed to learn what it felt like when the person who raised you turns into the woman who holds the power to bring your entire house of cards crashing down. And believe me, I was just getting started. Some betrayals you can forgive. Others cut so deep, they leave scars that never quite heal. This was the latter. And it wasn't just about hurt feelings anymore. This was about survival, dignity, justice. See, people think the worst part of betrayal is the emotional wound, the heartbreak. But that's not true. The worst part is when betrayal threatens your livelihood, when it crawls into your everyday life like mold in the walls, quiet, steady, and toxic. I was behind on rent, utilities were stacking up, and my knees were beginning to give out. I'd been told by my doctor that I needed surgery on my left knee, but who could afford that when every dollar was going toward groceries and gas? My son had promised he'd take care of me someday. Said he'd pay me back for everything. Said, when he made it, I wouldn't have to work anymore. Now, here I was, 62 years old, still hauling trash bags out of a diner at 2 a.m., while he discussed investment portfolios with his wife's family. But you know what made my blood boil the most? He knew I was struggling. I hadn't hidden it. I'd called him once during a moment of desperation, asking for help with a medical bill. He didn't answer. 2 days later, he sent a short text. Can't talk. Things are complicated. Hope, you understand. Understand what? That I had become disposable? That the woman who once walked in the rain just to get his asthma prescription now had to choose between food and medication? It was more than hurtful. It was dangerous. He had taken everything from me, the years, the energy, the money, and in return, he gave me silence. But here's where karma has a funny way of showing up. Because when someone takes your kindness for weakness, they forget that kindness comes from strength. And the kind of strength that carried me through 3 jobs, single motherhood, and a lifetime of struggle, that strength doesn't just fade. It waits. And now, with every overdue notice, every creak in my joints, every night I spent eating toast for dinner while imagining his 5-course meals, I started to realize this betrayal wasn't just personal. It was systemic. This was about all the Women like me, mothers who give everything and end up with nothing, who raise their children on hope, only to be erased the second those children climb the ladder. I wasn't just fighting for closure anymore. I was fighting for respect, and not just from him, but from a society that pats you on the back for being a dedicated mom, then leaves you to rot in a rental with no pension and no safety net. The people at his level, the world he had climbed into, they didn't see me as a person. I was a shadow, an origin story to be trotted out when it looked good in interviews, a photo in an old album to prove he'd come from nothing. But I was never nothing. I was everything that got him to where he stood. And if he thought he could pretend otherwise, he was about to learn the hard way what happens when the person you step on decides to stand tall again. So I made a vow, not just to remind him of who I was, but to reclaim every inch of ground I'd lost to this betrayal. I'd protected him for decades. Now, I would protect myself. I'd given him power. Now, I was going to take it back. And if that meant shaking the very foundation of the empire he'd built on my back, so be it. Because this wasn't just about one woman being abandoned by her son. It was about every sacrifice he'd pretended didn't matter, and every consequence he thought he could escape. He'd built a life on lies of omission. Now, I was going to bring the truth roaring back into his world like a storm he never saw coming. There's something liberating about hitting rock bottom. Once you've been betrayed by your own flesh and blood, once the last illusion is gone, you stop fearing loss, because what's left to lose? That was the space I was in when I started planning. Not out of vengeance for the sake of pain, but out of necessity, to reclaim what was mine, to make things right. I wasn't looking to destroy him. I was looking to wake him up. And to do that, I needed a plan, not some outburst or emotional confrontation that would let him walk away feeling like the victim. No, I needed precision, control, evidence. So I started with what I had. First, the loan. The $38,000 he had begged me to co-sign so he could survive law school. I still had the documents, his name, my signature, proof that I backed him when no one else would. That money came from my mother's small inheritance, money meant for my retirement, or maybe a down payment on a better place. But I gave it to him because I believed in him. Now, that loan was my leverage. Second, the life insurance policy. Years ago, I had made him the sole beneficiary, thinking he'd always be my boy, the one I could trust to carry my legacy. It made sense back then, but not anymore. I visited my union's benefits office and updated the policy immediately. Took him off. Added a small nonprofit in my community instead, one that helps single mothers get back on their feet. I figured if I couldn't count on him, at least that money could go to women like me. Third, I made copies of everything. I had old texts, emails, financial records, screenshots of messages where he promised to repay me, promised to take care of me once he made it. Messages filled with gratitude and assurances, back when he still saw me as his lifeline. He thought they were forgotten. They weren't. But that was just the foundation. The real work began when I started looking deeper into his new life. His in-laws were powerful, yes, but they were also image-obsessed. They prided themselves on their spotless reputation. One whisper of scandal, and their perfectly constructed facade would begin to crumble. And here's the irony. My son, in his desperation to fit into that world, had been bending truths left and right. I pulled up the online article again, the one that featured him and Rebecca in that glossy magazine spread. It praised him for pulling himself up by the bootstraps, talked about his time living in shelters, and growing up in the foster system. Foster system? I was the one who raised him. Alone, yes, but he never saw a day without a roof over his head. He had rewritten his origin story to fit the Cinderella narrative they wanted, and in doing so, he erased me. But here's the thing about erasing the truth. You can't do it when someone else still remembers every detail. So I started documenting, not just for myself, but for the public. My plan wasn't to destroy his career. I wasn't going to ruin him. I was going to expose him, to make the truth undeniable, to make him and the people around him See who really built that fairy tale life he flaunted. And if I could recover the money he owed me in the process, even better. I spoke to a lawyer at the local legal aid office, showed her the co-signed loan, the unpaid promises, and the fabricated origin story that was being used for public gain. She nodded slowly and said, "You might have more power here than you think." That was all I needed to hear. My plan was in motion. No yelling, no scenes, just facts, collected quietly, like the steady drip of water that eventually cracks. Stone. He wanted to forget me. He wanted to pretend he came from nothing. Well, he was about to find out what happens when nothing remembers everything. I didn't waste time. Once the lawyer confirmed I had legal standing on the unpaid loan, I knew I had the first domino in place. But this wasn't just about money. It was about control. And control comes from documentation, discipline, and patience. So I did what I'd done all my life when things got hard. I got organized. Step 1. Secure the paper trail. I gathered every financial document I could find. Student loan statements, co-signed contracts, my bank withdrawals during the time he was in school, even the printed texts where he'd promised to repay me. Every message, every receipt, every date. It all mattered. I also compiled my employment history. 3 jobs at once for nearly 6 years. Pay stubs, tax returns, all showing how I supported him while he studied, interned, and found himself. It's amazing how powerful a well-documented history becomes when the world tries to erase your role in someone's success. Step 2. Clean up my digital footprint. If I was going to move forward with this, I had to be invisible online. I tightened the privacy settings on all my social media accounts, removed old posts, changed passwords. This wasn't out of fear. It was strategy. I knew the minute my son or his PR-obsessed in-laws caught wind of my actions, they'd try to discredit me, so I got ahead of it. I scrubbed everything they could twist or use to shift the narrative. If they were going to come for me, they'd find nothing but truth. Step 3. Notify the right people, quietly. I didn't go public, not yet. I started small. I sent a formal letter through my lawyer to my son's office, outlining the unpaid loan and our intent to pursue civil action if he didn't respond. No threats, just facts. That letter wasn't just for him, it was for his employer. A prestigious law firm with a strict code of ethics. If he wanted to play with the big boys, he needed to start acting like one. And nothing makes a firm more nervous than a lawyer with a potential fraud claim hanging over his head. The response was swift. Not from him, of course. He was too cowardly for that. But from his firm's legal department. Suddenly I had their attention. Step 4. Reclaim the narrative. I reached out to the journalist who'd written the rags to riches piece about my son and his wife. I was calm, professional. I introduced myself, said I appreciated the piece, but wanted to clarify a few factual inaccuracies. Then I laid it out. Not with accusations, but with documents. Proof he was never in foster care. Proof he lived with me until nearly 30. Pictures of us together, birthday cakes, holidays, moving day at law school. All the moments he'd cropped out of his glossy fairy tale. The journalist was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Would you be willing to talk more about your story?" I said yes, but not yet. I still had one more step. Step 5. Cut. The cord, legally and emotionally, I removed him from everything. My will, my emergency contact forms, my medical directives. It was harder than I expected, but also freeing. For so long, I'd kept a door open for him in my heart, thinking maybe, just maybe, he'd remember who I was. But I finally understood. I didn't need him to remember. I remembered. And I wasn't going to wait around, hoping he'd come back with apologies. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about me. About every mother, every caregiver, every person who's ever been cast aside by someone they sacrificed for. It was about reclaiming worth. I wasn't some sob story. I wasn't a forgotten footnote. I was the storm that built the house, and the one now preparing to blow it down, brick by dishonest brick. I had the receipts. I had the law on my side. And now, I had something even more dangerous. Momentum. He didn't expect me to show up, especially not in that glass tower where he worked, surrounded by sleek suits and over-polished smiles. But I walked in with my spine straight, folder in hand, and my lawyer beside me. Reception looked confused, even a little amused, until they saw the envelope. It was addressed to James R. Morgan, Escobar, stamped by the court, and accompanied by a letter of intent to file a civil claim for repayment of an outstanding personal loan with full supporting documentation. My son had 10 days to respond. I didn't need to say a word, but I did. For me. I told the receptionist, "Please let Mr. Morgan know his mother was here." Then I walked out, head high. The fallout came quickly. Apparently, he tried to get ahead of it, made some panicked calls, probably trying to spin the situation. But facts don't lie, and neither do contracts. The firm called a meeting. They asked him why he never disclosed a personal financial liability tied to his own mother, why he misrepresented his background. And while I wasn't in the room, I heard later from a paralegal friend that he stammered through excuses, said I was unstable, confused, vengeful. So, I sent in the final piece. A copy of the article he'd lied in. Next to it, school records, tax filings, proof of residence, my old lease agreements, every document showing he lived with me, not in the foster system like he claimed, not scraping, by a loan, but supported by a mother working 3 jobs and going hungry some nights so he could eat. I didn't just poke holes in his story. I shattered it. The journalist called again. Said she wanted to publish a follow-up piece, this time on my story. She said the truth needed to come out, especially after discovering that this wasn't the first time his family had rebranded someone for the sake of appearances. I agreed. The article dropped a week later, and when it did, the internet exploded. Headlines read, "Mother of self-made, attorney reveals truth behind viral success story. Legal hotshot fabricated background, mother comes forward." With receipts. I didn't enjoy watching him squirm. I didn't revel in his embarrassment. But I did feel proud. Not because I hurt him, but because I stood up for myself, for my story, for everything I'd done that he tried to erase. And it didn't end with articles or firm pressure. The civil court ruled in my favor. He was ordered to repay the loan with interest. He tried to appeal. He lost. Eventually, he reached out. Sent an email. Cold. Formal. "I hope you're satisfied. You've ruined my reputation. I just wanted to move on with my life." I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. He had moved on a long time ago. He just hadn't counted on me doing the same. But now I was. I got a small settlement. Enough to cover my knee surgery and pay off my remaining debts. Enough to finally breathe. I started volunteering at the nonprofit I'd named as my beneficiary, helping other single mothers navigate systems built to forget them. I shared my story, not out of bitterness, but as a warning and a rallying cry. We give everything. And sometimes they forget, but we remember. And we can rise, again and again, because we were built from resilience. As for him, he lost the partnership track. His firm didn't fire him, but they pulled him from public-facing cases. Rebecca's family stopped parading him around at charity events. His star dimmed, not because I tore him down, but because I removed the foundation he stood on. He built a legacy on a lie, and I took my truth back. I'm not waiting for an apology. I don't need one. I have peace. I have power. I have me. So to anyone out there who's been betrayed by someone they loved, remember this. Karma doesn't always come crashing in like a storm. Sometimes you are the storm. And the reckoning? It starts the moment you decide your silence is no longer for sale.